It's your girl Ash, and I am back with another video. Before I get started, I just want to say your girl finally got some heat. It's still a little bit chilly in the house, but it's going to take some time for it to warm up. Big shout out to everybody that basically checked on me and was hoping that everything was okay. I love you guys. I missed you guys. And today I'm going to be watching World War II Forgotten Massacre by Mark Felton Productions. If you guys would like to check out my other videos, the link will be up at the top. And if you guys haven't subscribed already, what are you waiting for? Hit the red button so you can be a part of the family. Don't forget to give your girl a thumbs up. Enough of me talking, let's get straight into this reaction. Katyn.
One really important aspect of the start of World War II is often overlooked in the retelling. Everyone knows that Germany invaded Poland on the 1st of September 1939, setting in motion the outbreak of a much bigger world war when, on the 3rd of September, Britain and France, after demanding that Hitler halt his military action, declared war on Germany, as per an agreement they had with Poland. That's the narrative of the beginning of World War II in Europe. But a fifth player is often left out of the story: the Soviet Union.
Stalin?
Poland and the USSR had no love for one another. In fact, in 1919 to 21, the Poles had fought the Soviets over western Ukraine and defeated the Red Army at Warsaw. The Poles possessed a massive and well-trained army. In 1939, this amounted to 1.75 million regular troops, plus a further 500,000 in reserve. But the Polish military also had some terrible weaknesses that the Germans would exploit during their invasion, notably an over-reliance on horsed cavalry and too few modern tanks, and out-of-date artillery and fire control equipment.
I wonder why they didn't have access to tanks. Is it because, I don't know. I would like to know why they relied on horses. How come, they didn't have updated artillery? Why they didn't have tanks? I really would like to know that.
Its air force was also third class in comparison to the German Luftwaffe. But the Poles were very tough and determined fighters, and the Germans knew that they would have a serious fight on their hands. Hitler had a secret weapon to undermine the Poles: Stalin. In a breathtaking piece of diplomatic intrigue, Hitler concluded a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union a few days before the invasion of Poland. Given all that Hitler had said about the Soviet Union and communism over the past 20 years, most Germans were as surprised as the Polish, British, and French by this apparent double standard. The pact included a secret clause whereby, working in cooperation with the German forces invading from the west, Stalin would unleash an invasion of Poland from the east.
So Poland has to deal with Hitler invading them and also the Soviets invading them. That's crazy.
The 17th of September 1939, the Polish forces had been pushed back by the German blitzkrieg and started massing their remaining forces.
But didn't they partake in World War II to help the Soviets fight in the United States? I don't get.
South and west of the capital, Warsaw. They also moved into a ton of Polish territory that stuck out between Romania and Hungary, both friendly nations. The plan was to hold out until Britain and France somehow came to Poland's aid. The French, as I have covered in another video, link in the end screen, launched a rather desultory Saar offensive into a part of western Germany, which did nothing to ease the pressure on Poland, and the British conducted some limited aerial bombing in the Rhineland. But then the hammer fell. On the 17th of September, the Soviets summoned the Polish ambassador in Moscow and informed him that because the Polish government had ceased to exist, which was a lie, and in order to protect Polish citizens of Ukrainian and Belarusian descent living in eastern Poland, Soviet troops would enter the country to restore order. 35 Red Army divisions invaded, dooming the remaining part of the Polish army resisting in what was called the Romanian bridgehead against the...
So, Stalin made it seem like he was going to Poland to help the Polish, but he's not. He's invading them.
Germans. Plenty of fighting remained, but assailed from east and west simultaneously, the conclusion was never in doubt. The very last Polish unit surrendered on the 6th of October 1939, Poland having suffered over 750,000 casualties. Large sections of eastern Poland were now under Soviet occupation. The Soviets captured some 400,000 Polish troops. Some escaped, and 42,000 of Ukrainian or Belarusian ethnicity were released. Some 125,000 were sent to camps run by Stalin's feared secret police, the NKVD. Repression began at once. Polish law had mandated that every non-exempt university graduate had to serve as a reserve officer in the military. The NKVD used this as an excuse to round up and imprison huge numbers of educated people, claiming they were military prisoners of war, seen by the Soviets as the key to Polish national identity and what they termed the intelligentsia. About 320,000 such people, including graduates, military officers, aristocrats, lawyers, doctors, police officers, and clergymen, were deported to the USSR and placed into camps. The driving force behind this persecution was the head of the NKVD, Lavrentiy Beria, who had already conducted years of terror and murder against Soviet citizens.
So basically, the Soviets and Stalin is doing what exactly Hitler has done to the Jews and what he has done to the Polish as well. He's basically killing off the educated, powerful people in Poland because he sees that they might be a threat. I did not know this. I mean, I knew that Stalin wasn't a great person. And some say that he was way worse than Hitler. But I did not know that he literally killed off so many people.
The Poles ended up in a series of camps in the western USSR. In the meantime, the Germans and their sector of Poland had also unleashed great repression on the Polish people. The Soviets demanded that the imprisoned Poles become pro-Soviet, most of whom refused not unreasonably to do so. Those who exhibited patriotic sentiments were labeled as enemies of the Soviet Union. A decision was now taken to start liquidating the worst of the enemies identified by Beria's NKVD. Stalin and 6 members of the governing Politburo in Moscow signed an order on the 5th of March 1940 to execute 25,700 Polish nationalists and counter-revolutionaries, as the Polish prisoners were termed. Why? The reasoning was to wipe out the core people who created and maintained Polish culture, to eradicate the people who would resist Stalin the hardest. The killings began after the 3rd of April 1940. 21,857 Polish prisoners, including 14,552 military POWs, being shot at various locations, including Katyn, near Smolensk in Russia. At Katyn, huge numbers of military officers, from generals to captains, were killed, including 14 generals, as well as 200 pilots, 20 professors, 300 doctors and surgeons, and hundreds of teachers, lawyers, engineers, writers, and journalists, up to 12,000 people.
And all of them are smart, educated and they were a threat to him. That's insane. Like, I'm just at a loss for words. I really don't know what to say. This is very, very sad that the Polish really had to deal with both sides and still fight in the war. That is just.
The bodies were buried in pits in the forest. And interestingly, the majority of the firearms used by the NKVD were German Walter Model 2 pistols, supplied to the Soviets by the Nazis.
Oh, that don't even make it no better.
And that was the end of the matter as far as Beria and Stalin were concerned. The dead at Katyn were just another tragedy to add to all the bloodshed of state murder that witnessed millions of Soviet citizens put to death and the evidence hidden in mass graves all over the country. That was until Hitler tore up his non-aggression pact with Stalin and invaded the Soviet Union on the 22nd of June 1941. Stalin now became an ally of Britain, transformed into kindly Uncle Joe Stalin, another victim of Hitler's insatiable lust for empire. And with the entry of the United States in the war in December 1941, the Soviet Union became the vital factor in eventual Allied victory over Germany.
So
the titanic struggle on the.
So basically, he's about to act like nothing has ever happened. He didn't do anything. Everything is all peaches and cream. Okay.
Eastern Front was tying down at any one time a good 70% of Germany's military power. It is no exaggeration to state that without the USSR's enormous sacrifice, Britain, its empire and dominions, and the United States could not have defeated Germany in Europe and simultaneously dealt with Japan in the Far East. So, for the duration of the war at least, Stalin was one of the good guys, meaning that the Western liberal democracies would turn a blind eye to Stalin's rule, even though it resembled and often surpassed Hitler's Germany for oppression and murder on a grand scale. The exigencies of war created some strange bedfellows indeed. Anyway, the Polish government in exile in London naturally wanted to know what had become of its missing citizens, remembering now that the Free Polish forces raised in the United Kingdom were fighting on the same side as Uncle Joe.
Yeah, investigate.
Interestingly, the Soviets had even signed an agreement with the Polish government in exile to create a Polish army from POWs the Soviets had taken in 1939 and held now in camps in order to help the Red Army on the Eastern Front. Stalin had a face-to-face meeting with General Sikorski, Poland's prime minister in exile, and basically explained the missing Soviet citizens as having become lost in the bureaucracy of his huge country. A sort of accounting error, but assuring Sikorski
killed them. You executed them. What do you mean?
That all was well. By now, the area of Smolensk was under German occupation. The Polish Home Army, the enormous resistance organization within occupied Poland, received reports from Polish railway workers who were performing forced labor for the Nazis of secret mass graves in the Katyn forest. The Germans also got wind of this story. In March or April 1943, not long after the surrender of the Sixth Army at Stalingrad, Germany's greatest Eastern Front calamity, the Germans decided to investigate. What the Germans uncovered was astounding. Almost 12,000 decomposing corpses dressed in winter uniforms with their identity documents and personal effects still present.
So the Germans are investigating this, but for what? You're killing them as well. So does it really matter at this point? What are you investigating? Both sides are basically fucked up. Now, is it because he's at odds with Stalin and he basically wants to expose him? That's the only thing that I can think of, because at this point they don't like the Polish. So it's kind of like, you guys really don't care. The only thing that I can think of is being, that him and Stalin are at odds now. he probably wants to expose the fact what the Soviets has done. But other than that, it doesn't even make sense.
German propaganda ministry director Dr. Josef Goebbels realized the potential of the story at once. Soviet barbarism for all the world to see. He knew that such a heinous crime would shock public opinion in Britain and America, and perhaps cause a rift in the alliance with the Soviet Union, to Germany's obvious advantage.
But why would anybody
You have to remember
them?
that Katyn was investigated so thoroughly by the Germans, not out of any sympathy for the Poles. The Germans had already killed hundreds of thousands of Polish citizens by this time, carrying out massive shootings, herding hundreds of thousands of Jews into ghettos, and then shipping them east to special camps. German outrage was simply a manufactured move to sow dissension in the Allied camp.
Try to
The
break
Germans
them up.
created the Katyn Commission in collaboration with the International Red Cross.
So basically, that's what he's trying to do. At this point, that's what the Germans want. They want to shake things up, basically break everyone up, have everyone turn against the Soviets. But I'm not sure how everything's going to pan out. We're about to find out.
The Germans wanted to make the investigation completely transparent so that they couldn't be blamed for perpetrating a cover-up of a crime that many suspected they had in fact committed. Forensic surgeons from Germany, Belgium, Bulgaria, Croatia, Denmark, Finland, France, Hungary, Italy, the Netherlands, Romania, Switzerland and Slovakia formed the Katyn Committee, the Germans even bringing in allied POW doctors and surgeons as witnesses to the exhumations, including British, American and Polish officers. The German press naturally had a field day. The Soviet reaction was a blanket denial. It was German propaganda. They had killed these Poles after the invasion of the USSR in 1941. General Sikorsky was not dissuaded from trying to uncover the truth. Sikorsky's probing caused Stalin to break off diplomatic ties with the Polish government in exile in London. Further damage to Allied relations were averted by Sikorsky's extremely convenient death in a plane crash at Gibraltar on the 4th of July 1943.
Wow.
When the Soviets recaptured Smolensk and the Katyn forest area in October 1943, the NKVD began a massive cover-up operation. Physical evidence was destroyed, witnesses intimidated, and a Soviet commission decided that the Poles had been shot by the Germans.
So they basically covering all their tracks. Like they're getting rid of everyone and anyone that possibly knows something.
Germans in the late summer of 1941, while the Poles were being used for forced labor. American and British journalists generally reported that they believed the Soviet story, but some had misgivings.
Wow.
From the evidence of meetings between Polish leaders and Churchill, it was clear that the British Prime Minister believed the Soviets were responsible for Katyn.
They were.
But the maintenance of the alliance with the USSR in the prosecution of the war against Hitler trumped the dead Poles in the forest. British intelligence agents who tried to warn the British government about what actually happened were sidelined or removed. US POW doctors who had been present at the exhumation of the corpses at Katyn reported to the State Department that the Soviets had been responsible. They cited the following evidence. The corpses were all dressed in winter clothing, but the Soviets insisted the men had been shot in the high summer of 1941 by the Germans. No records, identification papers, or letters were found on the corpses dated later than spring 1940. The good condition of their clothes and boots indicated that they had not been prisoners for very long. These reports were suppressed and made top secret. Again, America needed the Soviets in the fight against Hitler.
So basically,
the Katyn Forest Massacre was placed on the indictment against German war crime suspects at the Nuremberg trials. The Soviets pushed hard for this, but US and British judges dismissed the charges through lack of evidence. From the 1950s to the 1980s, various attempts were made in Poland to establish the truth, but the communist regime there always quashed such attempts for obvious reasons. It was only in 1989 the Soviet academics finally admitted that Stalin had indeed ordered the Katyn massacre. In 1990, Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev named the NKVD as a responsible organization for the massacres. In 1990, President Boris Yeltsin ordered the transfer of many documents pertinent to Katyn from Russia to Poland. A huge Russian investigation eventually clarified exactly what had happened, but many volumes of documents still remain classified. No one has ever stood trial for Katyn, and by now everyone involved must be dead. And it was only in 2010 that the Russian parliament officially admitted that Stalin and Beria were responsible for the massacres.
Wow.
It was the same year that the Polish president and 95 Polish politicians, high-ranking army officers and their staff were killed in a plane crash on their way to a ceremony in Russia marking the 70th anniversary of the Katyn massacre, fueling conspiracy theories that echo those that still surround the death of Prime Minister Sikorsky in a plane crash in 1943. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton.
Wow, I cannot believe that it took so many years for them to find out what happened to the Polish. Like, that is so crazy. And I can see on both sides how they would think that the Nazis, Germany, had like some type of propaganda going on. Like, you really can't trust them. And then it's like, at the same time, if the Soviets is fighting against Germany with the Polish, with the United States, it's kind of like, why would they believe Germany and they're already fighting against Germany? So I really kind of understand both parts, both sides, but it's so crazy that it took so many years to find out. But it should have been some type of way for them to know, because they both invaded different sides of Poland. So I'm pretty sure the people that was invaded and went to the camps that the Soviets took them to pretty much probably had certain type of IDs and stuff like that. So I think there should have been a way, but maybe I'm thinking like too far ahead as far as the being advanced or something like that with the IDs. I don't know. Comment down below. Let me know what you guys think. It's so messed up that, that the Poles went through so much. You have Germany, you have the Soviets, and then they're fighting in World War II. Like, that is just extremely fucked up. Definitely fucked up. They've been through a lot. Comment down below. Let me know your thoughts and opinions. Don't forget to give your girl a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye, fam.